Hello friends, happy 2023. I hope you had a great start to the new year. Today I'm making a video for you about how to mix using spectrum analyzers in the studio. So this is something that I've specifically been asked about by people on the comments here on YouTube, and I realized actually it's a really great question, and it's something also that took me a little while to sort of come to grips with. So yes, it's a good idea to look into this a little bit more deeply. So I primarily use two analyzers. Here, let me reduce the sound here a bit so we have a clearer background to chat on. The ones that I primarily use are this one here, which is called FLUX Analyzer. It's the smallest version they do. I think it's called Studio or something or other. We can have a look at that. And the other one I use is this one from Adapter, which is from Plugin Alliance. It's called ADPTR Metric AB. So let's start maybe really with the basics of what can you actually see on a spectrum analyzer, and let's start with the Flux one because that is the one that I think is the easiest to read. So let me bring in all the sound again, and let's have a quick listen to what changes, for example, when I bring in the bass. You saw those red frequencies, red-orange frequencies came in. Let me put a low cut now again. And the high frequencies, let me bring them back in. So you saw that that's the blue purple ones. So yes, what we're basically seeing on the analyzer is, let me go over here with my mouse so that I can show it to you properly. Give me a quick second just to add some color to this so you can see it well. Okay. All right, so I hope you can see it well. Yeah, now it's good. So what we're seeing in the one that, well, actually they're all kind of important. So let's start here at the left. This is the low end of your track, which is basically what you're seeing here. So you can see the kick punching through here very nicely. I can actually solo the kick so we can have a quick listen and look at what does the kick just sound like on its own. So you see it does have frequencies all the way up because you need them for it to punch through in the mix, but the core of its energy is in the low frequencies, and in this case it's sort of around, what is it, 50 hertz for this kick. And then the bass ideally should sort of sit nicely against that in its own, let's say, frequency spectrum. That would be the things that we're hoping for here. So let me show you what the bass looks like. So you see the bass has its second harmonic, which is what we're primarily sort of hearing up here and down here. The kick was at 50, so it's exactly in this little gap, and the bass has its fundamental below the kick because this is pretty low bass. So I've, in this case, done it quite nicely that I've left the space for the kick to come through. Let me show you. You see how it punches through nicely in that gap right there. So this is one way that you can use spectrum analyzers, is to check are you having enough space and gaps in your mix for the instruments to work cleanly. If you have your kick fundamental frequency and your bass on exactly the same frequency, which people sometimes recommend to tune your kick to the pitch of your track, which I don't do, that just makes it so much harder. So I personally wouldn't recommend that. Here we have the low mids, which is, for example, a nice place to position toms. So let me bring in the toms in this track solo. Are they playing here? Let's have a look. Where are you guys? Toms. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong track here. It's called groove in this case. So as you see, the toms are playing over here, a little bit above the kick and the bass. Let me bring it all together for you. So as you could see, I hope, the toms are playing a bit higher than both the kick and the bass. So I'm trying to space things out a bit in the mix. And then above here is your mids. You can see it below here. So you also see the frequency in cycles per second, all the way from 20 hertz, which is as low as we can hear, to 20 kilohertz, which is 20,000 cycles per second. And that's where all the very high frequency stuff lives, for example, like hi-hats. our hearing is trained primarily to respond to this area, which is the mids. There's something called Fletcher-Munson Curves, which is in essence saying that, you know, I don't want to be too technical, but we're most sensitive to frequencies in the mid-range, which is why it's so critical that your mid-range sounds good and is clean and isn't hurting your ears, and actually why it's also very critical that you try to listen at the same loudness, because these Fletcher-Munson curves, let me dig them out quickly while I'm chatting, they vary with loudness. So if you're listening one day extremely loud and the other day quite low volume, you're not going to be hearing your track in the same way, basically. So here you see these Fletcher-Munson curves, and you see that at a certain loudness, which is usually what people aim for, is sort of between 80 and 90 decibels, our hearing is the flattest. And a good way to do that is to get a decibel app on your phone and just put it on in your room and see how loud is actually 90 decibels. And that's also sort of between 80 and 90 is also a nice loudness to listen to, because you will not exhaust your hearing as quickly as if you're blasting 100 decibels all day. So I aim to go sort of around 80, 85, and I know how loud that is both in headphones and in my room, and I would recommend that to you. Because yeah, your hearing is the flattest there, and you're going to be listening to your track the same way, basically. So coming back to the analyzer, where is it? Here we go. Let me play this track back for you again, so that you can have a listen to what else is happening on this track. So we have our mids, and then we have our high frequencies up here. So let's have a quick listen to just the percussive elements and the hi-hats, for example, the drums. So there you go. That's only my drum group and my percussion groups now soloed. Let me see if I can find it for you so you can see all exactly. So I've just soloed the drum and percussion groups, and what we're seeing here is that, yeah, you know, none of them really have frequencies below, what is it, 400 or 500 hertz. There's a little bit there. It's almost impossible to get that completely clean, but it's very clean. I mean, this is like 100 minus 108 decibels, so that's very, very low level. Yeah, and up here is sort of the transition towards the highs, and the stuff that you'll find there is, for example, maybe a little bit of reverb tails, hi-hats, shakers, percussions, and your snares and claps and things like that usually tend to live a little bit lower. So when you solo things like this on a spectrum analyzer, it's a good test also to see is your sounds clean. If you have heaps of low-end stuff happening on your recordings or whatever, then that's going to interfere with your bass and kick drum. And then of course we also want to see at what lives in the mids. Well, that's sort of the harmonics, the mid sounds, sort of, you know, the sounds that we base our track off of, that make up sort of the non-drums and non-bass sounds of a track. So let me find a spot in the track where there's a little bit more happening, so that we can maybe do a little loop and I can show you. So actually I see here, I actually still have quite a bit of low end on some sounds here. I'm not exactly sure which one that is. That could be cleaned up a bit. That's not ideal. Although I have to say, in the final mixdown of this track, it doesn't bother me. And you have to be a little bit careful that if you take all the lows away from these kinds of sounds completely, they can lose their groove, etc. a little bit. This is a bit excessive though. I would like to see a little bit less of this jumping out. So let's do it quite practically. Like, what would it look like to actually fix that? Well, we have to figure out first which is the sound that has that low end sort of let's go, I'm looking for this one. Which is the sound that has that low end sort of rumble going on there? I don't think it's this. This is pretty clean. It's pretty organized down there. I'm okay with that. What is this? Ah, it's this one. It's a lead sound that I've also placed through a outboard gear. It's like a Varimute compressor, and maybe it added something like that. So, you know, this is a really easy thing to clean up. Let me just look for an EQ. Let's take the classic one. And yeah, the way I've set it, you see it's already immediately filtering stuff down, because that's kind of one of those things you always need. So that's it. Now that sound doesn't have as much low energy down there anymore. So let's have a listen again to what our sort of melodic elements are doing there. Okay, so that now leaves a lot more space, you see below, for the drums, so for the kick drum, bass and toms, and at the highs there's also plenty of space left for the hi-hats. So let's take this off solo and check it back in the mix. Alright, there we go. Okay, so this is the spectrum analyzer. That's kind of one of the most critical things to understand, but there's a lot more happening on the Flux that is really useful to us. The other thing that it's showing here on the left, this Christmas tree, if you will, is, I don't even know the name of this thing, I just can explain to you what it does, is it's showing you again the frequency from 20 cycles down here all the way up to 20,000 cycles, so 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and it's showing you how much stereo information you have across the frequency spectrum. So as you can see, most of my stereo stuff is starting around 150 hertz going up to 2-3K, and that's great. You don't generally want huge amount of stereo stuff down in the lows here, because well, it used to be that a vinyl would jump out of the groove if there was a lot of stereo stuff happening in the low end, but also most systems perform best if the low end is mono, and very often actually most systems don't even have stereo bass, it's just a mono stack somewhere, often under the stage or in some corner of the club. So trying to do stuff with stereo here, it can be cool. I do use stereo bassline sometimes, but just make sure that when you go to mono, you check your mix in mono, it doesn't collapse and sound weird or even completely disappear. So let me show you what the track sounds like on this meter here, or it looks like. As you can see, it's pretty clean. I don't have loads of stereo stuff happening down here. Yeah, so that's kind of a nice way to check that things are mono compatible. It's also a really great way to see if a sound that you're maybe processing through a stereo device isn't skewed, like if this is all going off to the left when you're running your kick drum through it, for example. So let me show you what happens. I'm just going to solo my kick drum now. So you can see, if I were to pan this to the left a bit, you see how it starts to shift? That's an immediate giveaway that, hey, something's wrong with the way you've set your output gear. The same with this Goniometer, I do know what that one's called. So that's a dead giveaway that something's off, right? Like some of your sound that's meant to be dead mono is actually not playing equally loud on the left and the right. So the way I'm doing this now is just to pan my kick left and right a little bit, as you can see. So that's also a very nice tool to make sure that things that should be mono really are mono. And the Goniometer, which is the one here, also shows that. It shows basically phase correlation. So this thing at the bottom here shows you how positive your phase is, and what that means is your speakers are congruently pushing forward when a sound hits. If I were to double this bass track now and invert the phase on the second track, look at what happens. Let me see if I have a utility on there, if I can do that and invert the phase. Can I? Yeah. Can I not? Oh, it's not soloed. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so what I've done now is inverted the phase on that bass completely, and because it's a mono sound, basically what happens is it disappears. The speakers can't push and pull at the same time. Let me mess a little bit with that kick so it's not an identical sound. I'm just going to pitch it up a little bit, so then it won't null out anymore. Okay. So what you're seeing now is, you see how this little thing here is sort of not pushing clearly to the one, and I can maybe make it a little bit so it's even worse. Can I? Let me see, what's the original set to? +3. So let me tune it so it's not quite as easy. Let me do +3 and just like a slight detuning. Okay. So now like I have the copy of the kick that I made slightly detuned, and you can see it's a mess, right? You don't even hear it, although look at this, you're pushing a huge amount of energy to the speakers. You can see it on the spectrum analyzer, but you're not hearing it, right? So let me show you what happens if I mute that out of phase signal. There you go. And our Goniometer also will slowly start going back up towards the one. So what this is showing us in essence is if you have phase issues in your track. Besides that, what it can also do, however, is show us how loud our track is in a funny kind of way. So if a track is massively loud, you'll start to see sort of a square form here on the analyzer. Let me take up the level of this track a bit more on the mastering chain. So this is actually all done in the Rapid Flow template. It's the standard Rapid Flow template mastering chain. It's a track that I started out in the template and I've just been working on. Let me show you what happens with that square here if the loudness starts, if the level starts to get really loud. Are you seeing that there's an outline of a square forming between this? So basically that's showing you like, okay, this is getting really, really loud now. And you can see it on this final meter here on the side. So there you can see it nicely. Let me see if I can find a place that's even more dense in the track. So you get an eye for it at a certain point and you start to be able to see like, okay, my track is definitely getting to the point now where it's at the right loudness. So let me take this back down a little bit so we have dynamics again in our track. Actually, let me show you that full screen because I realized we weren't on the correct screen. Okay, so let me bring up the loudness. This is sort of what I would aim for normally, but I want to show you that sort of loudness view on the Goniometer. So I'm going to now increase the level on that mastering chain so that you can see it really clearly on the Goniometer. You see that you can see kind of an outline start to appear. Like that's when you know stuff is really, really loud, actually too loud. And as you can see, my meters are all in the red also, so that's not good also. So I just wanted to show you that on the Goniometer that that's a function that I also use it for to kind of know when I'm in the ballpark. But basically when you see it sort of pumping from the zero here to the top along the mono line and you have some nice stereo information happening also, that's good. Like then you can be pretty happy. And the final thing on the flux meter here is these level meters. This is kind of set up to replicate a VU meter. I just kind of know how to read it so I know how much dynamics is left in my music. The one here is a true peak meter, so it's showing me I'm peaking slightly below zero. I think I've set it to like minus 0.3 in this track. So that's all good. And the final meter here, I've set it to Spotify Loud, which is just like, it's like a preset you can choose here. You have a whole bunch of presets, Apple Music, for example, also. The Spotify and Apple both agree roughly that, yeah, like minus 14 is sort of where they expect the music to be. So yeah, I've just set it so that if I don't see anything red here, I know things are good. Yeah, and maybe one more tip on using the flux specifically. There is a button here to show you, as pretty as it is, to show you the sum, actually the individual channels, and it switches to green. I find this a little bit easier on the eyes, and it just allows me to look more clearly if there's any gaps in the frequency spectrum. So what you want is for this to run off kind of very smoothly in your track. So you want it to be sort of peaking at the loudest in the low end here, and then sort of fall down smoothly. For me, it's just two sort of lines, and not have massive gaps in the frequency spectrum. Then I kind of know, okay, this is a master that's pretty on point. Now, all this would be based just on my hearing and being able to read the spectrum analyzers, which is not ideal because, as I hope you know, it's key to listen to a reference while you're doing this kind of work. It'll massively help with knowing if you're really, on point with what it is that you're producing. So because I don't want to get a copyright strike, I used to do this and not think anything of it, but I've realized now it's kind of a big deal if someone does get annoyed that you use their music. So I'm just going to use a track of my own. I said that now so easily. Bear with me just a quick second. I'm going to load a track of my own. so that we have something that we can listen to, and I can show you what I do in this AB of those tracks, so that I know if I'm on the ballpark or not. So let's take this track, which is the one that you know from, it's the same track that's in the template. So let me set a loop on this track, in the loudest part basically. Okay, so now I've set a loop for us to work with here. And this is now my reference track. This is what I'm saying, okay, this is what I want to work with. So the orange one is the track that I'm referencing, and the blue one will be my track. So as you can see, I'm using the so-called layers. There's also like a dual version, which allows you to look at this quite clearly, and there's also just a single where you can see either your track or the one you're referencing. I think the layered one is amazing. Because yeah, you can see exactly where you still have gaps or if you have massive discrepancies. So this is the one I tend to most use, referencing my track against some commercial reference. So you can see down here I have all my tracks in here that I would normally reference. But yeah, I'm sorry I can't play those for you now, but as I've suggested, buy yourself some wave files of tracks that you think sound great. And yeah, you can see I'm really close to my reference here, so that's great. I'm happy with that. It could use maybe a little bit more highs. I see a gap there. Yeah, like this average shows you a bit more information, but I personally just use it like this because it's kind of the cleanest. There's also a correlation meter here, which is showing you very similar to what FLUX meter analyzer showed you the Christmas tree. It's showing you your mono compatibility. I don't use it so much here. I prefer to use the FLUX for that. This is exactly the Christmas tree, just in a different way to look at it in Adapter AB. This I think is also really nice. It shows you the loudness of tracks. So you can see that the track that I am working on right now has sort of a competitive loudness, and my reference is louder. Okay. So I could maybe add a little bit more loudness to the track I'm working on now. Actually, it does sound like that would do it some good. And then there's this here, which is sort of integrated LUFS loudness metering of the integrated, sorry about that, I have some coughs going on still. So the integrated, the short term, and the momentary. And I think the integrated one is the most interesting one. Whatever you're referencing, you want the integrated one to be sort of in the same ballpark if it's, how to say, relevant for your music. So if your music maybe needs more dynamics, maybe it doesn't need to be as insanely loud, but just for the sake of argument here, I'm going to boost up this OT a little bit, and I'm going to boost up the gain a little bit on the limiter to see if we can get a little bit closer. And if I'm not sure if I'm entirely I could go and do this little trick, which is play my reference, press match, and it's now going to match the loudness of the reference track to my track, so I can listen to them at equal loudness. But also it's a great way to show you I'm still missing 1.2 dB of gain on my track. So let's add a little bit more gain. Normally I wouldn't want to do this just on the limiter, but this just to show you quickly. Let me reset this to 0. Let's go back to the loudness. So now we're pretty much in the ballpark. You can see it's close. So maybe dB off. So yeah, this is a little bit squeezed the life out of it now, but yeah, just to give you an idea of how you can do this. Yeah, let's go back to the track to a little bit part where it's not so full. So as you can see, I lean quite heavily on a combination of the FLUX together with the ADPTR Metric AB from Plugin Alliance. If I had to choose one, I would definitely take the adapter because it kind of combines everything. And just this spectrum analyzer trick of overlaying spectrums, that's something that I haven't seen FLUX do. I don't know if it can do it, but I don't think it can. This is gold. Like just being able to listen to your reference track and listening to so your reference track and your own track and being able to see, is my spectrum lining up? You stereo image is clean down here. You don't have huge peaks of mono non-compatibility. You know, your dynamics is close. You're pretty, you're pretty safe. You're home free. So I would very much recommend this plugin and the workflow of both if you want to go all in and use both. And that's of course luxury. I do know the plugin alliance stuff goes on sale pretty often. I know the adapter has been on sale multiple times for 15 or 19 bucks. There's also a subscription model. The Flux analyzer costs 50 bucks, I think, in its smallest version. And it's, besides, you know, being very useful, honestly, it's really nice to look at in the studio also. It's a really nice thing. Our son actually loves it. He's always like, show me the analyzer. And he sits here and kind of stares at it when we're hanging out in the studio. So yeah, it's one of the nicest looking analyzers I've seen also. So both pretty and functional. What more can you want? Okay, so I hope that this has been useful for you and gives you an idea of how to work with this. It's become a little bit of a long video, but there's a lot of topic ground to cover here. If you want to go more in depth on the Adapter AB, I have a separate video on that, so have a look for that in my channel. I'll link it somewhere here. And for the rest, I hope that this has been useful to you and that it helps your mixing by being able to have some visual cues also, and knowing if you're on the money with your track. Alright, that's it for me today. I hope you have a great time in the studio, and I'll see you on the next one.